Okay, in section 12.3, we're going to talk about measures of dispersion. Back in the last section, 12.2, we talked about measures of central tendency, mean, median, mode, and mid-range. And all of those data values ended up kind of being toward the middle of the data set. Where in this section, measures of dispersion really talk about data items that describe the spread of the data set. Okay? And so we're going to talk about a couple in this section, range and standard deviation. Those are two different measures of dispersion. So we talked about mean in the last section, and I can tell you that the mean temperature in Houston is 75 degrees, the average temperature. And the average temperature in Honolulu, Hawaii is also 75 degrees. But if you really look carefully at the spread of degrees in those two regions, the range is much wider in the two different regions. The range of temperatures in Honolulu is from 61 to 89, where in Houston it goes all the way down to 33 degrees and gets as hot as 103 degrees. So the range, the data items are more widely spread in Houston than in Honolulu, even though their average temperatures are the same. So that's an example of range. It's really the highest data value minus the lowest data value. So you can see how far spread the data items are. So if I give you a set of data, for example, in example number 1, and I ask you to find the range, you're simply going to take the highest number, you're going to take the lowest number, and you're going to subtract them to get a range. In this example, the range would be 9. That's one measure of dispersion. Okay. The second measure of dispersion that we're going to talk about in this section is what we call standard deviation. We're going to start off kind of basic in this example, and then in the next video we're going to get a little more complicated. But the second measure of dispersion is one that depends on all the data items. It's called standard deviation. The standard deviation is found by determining how much each data item differs from the mean. So if I give you this scenario, example number 2, gives us the 5 different data items. It looks like this is the different countries, and these are the number of workers in millions, and it gives us the different means for the different countries. Okay, and so what we're going to do first is we're going to find the deviation from the mean for the 5 different data values. So the first thing we have to do is actually find the mean. Remember in the last section, mean means you're going to add up all the data items, and you're going to divide by however many there are, so 5. And so I ended up getting a mean of 317. So that's our average number of workers for the 5 different countries, the average or mean. But then what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how far each of these data items differs from the mean. So I took the information from the bar graph and I placed it over here in the table. These are all of my different data items, and I want to figure out how much each of them differs from the mean. So I'm going to take my data item in China, which was 778 million people, and I'm going to subtract it from the mean. I ended up getting 461, a positive 461, which should make sense because that means I'm 461 million more than the average, more than the 317 mean that we got. If I was in India, how far does it differ from the mean? Well, I'm going to take the 472, I'm going to subtract my mean of 317, and it says I have 155, a positive, meaning I'm 155 above average. I'd like you to do the same thing for the other 3 different countries and figure out how far they differ from the mean. Pause the video and then come back and see if you got the same answers as me. So when I look at the U.S., and if the U.S. has an average number of workers of 147 million, and I subtract that, or subtract the mean from it, I should say, I ended up getting a negative number this time, a negative 170, which really means that I'm 170 million workers below average. In Indonesia, we're 211 million workers below average, and in Brazil, we're 235 million workers below average. So the positives and negatives should make sense depending on where you are compared to the mean. Positive meaning you're above the mean or average, negative meaning means you're below the average. We're going to kind of start off basic by doing that example, and like I said, we're going to get a little bit harder in the next section or the next video. So make sure that you practice that before moving on.